All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I'm your host, Coach J.K. McLeod, and before getting into today's episode where we are going to talk about using the extreme version of the goal that you are trying to hit as an excuse to stay small, I first, as always, want to say thank you for choosing to press play on Help Me Understand. You have no shortage of different podcasts that you can listen to, so I certainly never take it for granted that you chose to press play on Help Me Understand. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into today's episode. So first, let me start with a little bit of context on where the inspiration for this episode is coming from. Very recently, I stopped into a barbershop. I'm traveling currently right now. So for those of you who may be watching this on video, you may notice that the background is very different from my normal home setup. So I'm out of town for a bit here and dropped into a new to me-ish barbershop to get a haircut while I'm on the road. And as the barber and I were having a conversation, what typically will come up is, hey, so what do you do for work? Not me asking him, but him asking me, hey, what do you do for work? So I let him know I've got a couple of different careers that I'm involved in. I'm a full-time retail sales manager and also a personal trainer and fitness coach. So the fitness coach thing kind of got him somewhat interested in asking me a few questions. And one of the questions that he asked me was pertaining to how to go about getting a bit bigger, like gaining more muscle, but he didn't want to get, like, in my terms, of like a freakish bodybuilder type body. That's not what he was looking for. He was very, very adjacent to, or very common to a lot of folks that I talk to, whether I'm talking to men or women. This is a very common way that people will describe the goal that they're looking for if it involves building muscle is, I'm trying to build some muscle, but I'm not trying to get too big. So we talked about a few different principles when it came to the basics of muscle building, as far as lifting heavy enough within the 1 to 3 reps left in the tank range. We talked about the importance of getting in enough protein and overall calories. We talked about the importance of recovery and sleep. So really, really good conversation. Not sure if he'll end up listening to this podcast or not, but if he did, I do want to say thank you for inspiring this particular topic. So as we were having this conversation, though, something that I shared with him is, man, I truly cannot tell you the number of times that folks have framed their goal of building muscle as, I'm not trying to get too big. And the principles that someone would use if they are simply trying to gain a little bit of muscle versus trying to get, let's say, freakishly big, like mutant level, Mr. Olympia 2025 level. The very, very foundational basics of building muscle are exactly the same. So what happens is that when he or anyone that I talk to, and myself included, and I'll give you a few examples here, when we talk about not trying to get too big, we are, from my perspective, starting to plant the seeds of using this extreme version as an excuse for us not to implement a consistent foundational rhythm for the basic things. In this particular case, we're talking lifting heavy enough weights, eating enough food, making sure that you're getting in enough rest, drinking your water, all of those different pieces. So in getting into this particular topic, I want to branch it out a bit further than just fitness here. I really want to talk about overall how, from my perspective, some of us are really holding ourselves back because we're afraid of reaching some extreme version of success in a particular area. And what's happening is that fear of reaching that extreme level is really keeping us stuck, or at basically either average or even below average. So the pattern that I will typically see, and I'll use 3 different examples here, 3 different lanes here that hopefully anyone listening will be able to relate to at least one, if not all 3. So stick with me here. So someone will say that they want something. And let's use an example. A fitness example would be that they want to build muscle. A business or career example would be that they want to grow their business or get promoted to certain levels. And then a parenting example would be that they want to raise really good, productive citizens, let's say. So those are going to be the three examples. So let's then get into giving you some breakdowns of each of those examples. So they'll kind of keep me on track here. So first, let's say from a fitness example, you say, I want to build muscle, but I don't want to look like some sort of a freak. I want to get toned, but I'm not trying to look like crazy. All right. And if you go back, I don't have the episode in front of me, but if you go back a few episodes here, and I believe this episode is one that I did this year, it was an episode I did specifically geared towards when women will tell me, I just want to get toned. I don't want to get too bulky. And I share with you the real reason that your trainer or coach may not be worried that you're going to get too toned or too bulky. And spoiler alert, it's because more likely than not, you're not willing to sacrifice the things that it takes to get to that level, to get as bulky as the competitors and maybe even coaches that you are watching that you think are really bulky. You're not really willing to make those particular sacrifices. And P.S., I am also one of those people who is not willing to make the level of sacrifice that pro bodybuilders will make and even some other coaches will make in order to get to that particular level of bulk. But let's bring it back. So let's say that from a fitness standpoint, you say, I want to build muscle, but I don't want to look like a freak. And the reality is that getting to that like mutant level of muscle is extremely hard. It is very, very deliberate, and it typically involves more than just the foundational pieces of one, lifting heavy and eating enough, and two, potentially also implementing things like performance enhancing drugs and some additional supplements to go along with that. Something to keep in mind is it also takes years of dedication, years of specific training, years of nutrition accuracy and tracking and pieces like that. And also, oh, by the way, we've all got very different genetics. So just understand that if you're looking at something from a fitness example, you're not even close to that by simply staying consistent with lifting heavy enough and eating enough protein. Let's also then look at it from the standpoint of the business analogy. So the one that I can most closely relate to is if somebody is an entrepreneur. So let's say that somebody says, hey, I want to build a successful business, but then they will immediately say, well, yeah, but I don't necessarily want like 100 clients because that's just way too much. I was recently having a conversation with a fellow coach, and we were talking about putting together an in-person event. That's something that's on my vision list. My intention list for 2025 is creating a in-person, let's call it a seminar, to talk about the 4A framework for building and maintaining habits. And as we were talking back and forth about the different ideas that we had with that, something that she mentioned was, well, I just don't know that I want to use all of these different social media outlets to advertise it. That just feels like too much, because what if too many people show up? And it opened up another level of conversation where I was like, well, that's interesting that you would think about it that way, because it really seems like what you're basically saying is I'm going to hold back on doing everything that I possibly can to make this thing successful because I don't want it to be too successful. And hate to break it to you, but the reality that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're going to have 100 people who want to do this particular thing is not necessarily likely. And also, if it is something that happens, then okay, put a system in place that helps you kind of sift through, okay, who is this actually for? Who is it not for? Like that sort of a thing. Because the flip side of it is, if you are going into, and this is the conversation that she and I had, if you're going into this with the vision of, I want people to show up, but not too many people, then it's going to hold you back from doing specific things, like in this particular case, getting uncomfortable and advertising it on particular social media channels where friends or family might see, versus a social media channel, where it's mostly like other coaches or other potential clients, people that really don't know you, like in real life. So again, instead of building strong systems and instead of really getting outside of the comfort zone, what will happen is, again, to use the entrepreneur example, we basically will pull back before we've even got like 10 people or 20 or 30 people. We start to limit things before we even get any sort of momentum growing. Also, it's somewhat relatable in the business aspect, can also be if you are currently working for another company and you're thinking to yourself, well, I want to grow my career, but I'm not trying to be the CEO of the organization. Okay, so what sort of things are you holding yourself back from doing because you are telling yourself the quote unquote reason that you don't go above and beyond in certain areas is because you're not trying to be the CEO, you're just trying to be the next level of whatever department that you're in. When it comes down to it, more often than not, a lot of the very basic core competencies that you need from the entry level position to the CEO position, the very, very basics, I'm not saying they're the same job. What I'm saying is the very, very basics tend to be the same no matter what. And then it becomes more about experience. It becomes more about future casting. It becomes more about being able to foresee like a vision for where things need to go, and then being able to identify the right people to put into the right place in order to implement that particular vision, versus when you're at the entry level, you are following the direction that you're given to implement a certain vision. Things like work ethic, being on time, having some sort of a semblance of organization and follow through, doing what you say that you're going to do. Those are very basic things that, regardless of the position that you're in, those are the things that maintain consistency and really build you up. So just keeping that in mind. So that was the other example here, as far as just areas where this mindset of being afraid of the extreme may be the excuse that you've got for not doing the basics. I thought about this as I was putting this episode together, thought about one other example, and I'm not sure how well this will land, and also it came to mind. So it coming down to parenting. And the thing that I think about is talking to someone, and also for myself, thinking I want to be like a really involved parent, but I don't want to be one of those quote unquote helicopter parents who tries to control absolutely everything. And you know what I'm talking about. So what happens is then, as parents, the fear of the extreme, which we'll say would be like the helicopter parent, the micromanaging parent, where like I got to be involved in every single aspect. And I'm of the opinion, love me or hate me for this, I'm of the opinion that things like that, the micromanagement and the jumping in and not letting kids, no matter what age, not letting them sometimes just kind of like sit in the suck and kind of start to figure things out a little bit, is what leads to a lot of what we work with in the fitness industry now, which is learned helplessness, where that individual was generally not put in a position to have to just, again, like figure it out with assistance and collaboration from a parent, but really figure things out as they go. So what happens then is, when we have this fear of being the extreme, then we start to hesitate to really stay involved, really set boundaries with certain things, or really just stay engaged in what's going on. So overall, like when it comes down to it, from my perspective, the reality is that when you are generally attentive and present, it doesn't automatically equal that you're being overbearing or a helicopter parent. So if we're to take again this example of, hey, I want to be a really involved parent, I want to make sure that my kids understand that I do have some interest in the things that they're involved in and the things that they're doing. Just remember, again, this is all my perspective, you can be committed and present without losing harmony and balance with how you parent. So that would be the third example that I've got for you. So I didn't intend this to be a super long episode, so let me start to kind of bring things together. So there are three things that I want to really have be hopefully some primary takeaways for you. So the first one is just, you are not going to become the extreme version of whatever you are identifying by accident. So if you are looking at this from a business standpoint, and this was the example that I talked with my barber about, or the barber that I dropped into, that really clicked for him, even after we had had the whole conversation around using the muscle building example, because we started walking through understanding just the basics of progressive overload, because I can nerd out on that all day. The piece that he said really clicked for him was when I gave him the example of, well, here's the deal, man. Like, you own your own business. You're an entrepreneur. You are a barber. I am sure that you have a particular goal that you would like to hit revenue wise this year. I don't know that it's at your best interest to say, well, I'm just trying to hit 1 million, but I definitely don't want to hit 1 billion, because man, 1 billion brings a whole bunch of different problems. Like, I don't want billionaire problems, but I could probably deal with millionaire problems. What is that holding you back from doing? And from his perspective, that's what really clicked, because from my perspective, at the end of the day, the difference between those, again, going back to the bodybuilding example, is going to be the things that he or anyone else who can relate to that particular business growth example is willing to or not willing to sacrifice. So going to the next level when it comes to business, going to the next level when it comes to fitness, requires certain types of sacrifices that you may or may not be willing to make. If you are not willing to miss a single practice or a single game for any of your children, then there likely is going to be a level that you will start to approach where that's a decision that you have to make. However, if you're making that decision super early in the process, then you may be limiting even reaching average or above average for the area that you want to grow in. So first, you won't become extreme by accident. 2, trying to hit or intending to hit an above average goal is going to require being above average in the consistency of your habits. So occasionally going for walks, occasionally lifting heavy enough, occasionally going to bed when you said you were going to bed, those aren't things that get you to average. Those are things that will keep you slightly below average. So, hate to say it to you, but from my perspective, that's just what the truth is. So if you are looking to implement some consistency when it comes to overall your level of fitness, when it comes to your level of business, when it comes to parenting, there are particular things that you will need to perform at above average, and that still is not going to get you to the extreme. The extreme is extreme for a reason. So keep that in mind. And then the last piece that I've got for you is just to really challenge you, for those who may be relating to this. If you feel like this is hitting you, this is a challenge to you to stop using the fear of being too much as an excuse to stay small or stay stuck. So stop using the fear of being too much as an excuse to stay small or stay stuck. You can absolutely take a look at where you're pulling back and give yourself permission to just go all in. So that's what I want to leave you with here. So to close things out, if you have listened to this in its entirety, I want to say thank you. I truly appreciate it. And friendly reminder, as we end things here, the Help Me Understand podcast is sponsored by Feed Your Habits. If you're watching this on video and watching it in real time before, I think, first or second week in May, I'm wearing one of the new releases that will be coming out around the second week in May, I believe, is what we've got it slated for. Feedyourhabits.com is where you can go. And if you put in my code JKFYH, again, that's JKFYH in all caps, you'll get 10% off plus free shipping on t-shirts, hoodies, crew necks, tanks, and we are, well, spoiler alert, we're going to be releasing crop tops also with this design that I'm wearing currently right now. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or listening to this just audio wise, you won't be able to see it. But if you go to feedyourhabits.com, around second week in May, you'll see what we've got there. And then also follow us on Instagram at Feed Your Habits. You'll be able to see sneak peeks of what we've got coming. So with that, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. Truly appreciate it. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.